This story is titled, "My Golden Brother's Wife Lied to Everyone That I Impregnated Her and My Parents Instantly Believed Her. But I didn't let it slide and forced a DNA test. Turns out neither of us was the biological father. Now the family and brother are begging for forgiveness." Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 29 years old. I run a small auto repair garage in Tampa, where I make a decent living and pay my taxes like any other responsible citizen. I've always been the type to mind my own business and keep things simple. Nothing special, nothing fancy about my life. I'm just a normal guy who handles his responsibilities and stays out of trouble. I never thought that living such a boring, predictable life could somehow make me a target for someone's vindictive scheme. I was dead wrong about that assumption, and it nearly cost me everything I'd worked to build. My older brother Vincent is 32, and has always been the one who seemed to have his life figured out. He married young, went through a divorce without any major drama, and generally appeared to navigate life's challenges with ease. About 4 years ago, he introduced our family to his new girlfriend Cassandra, who was 28 at the time. From the moment I met her, Cassandra struck me as different from Vincent's ex-wife. On the surface, she seemed calm and friendly enough, presenting herself as the kind of person who would fit seamlessly into our family dynamic. But there was something about her that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, but that felt fundamentally wrong. The first real glimpse of who Cassandra truly was came during that initial awkward dinner at my mother's house. While everyone else seemed charmed by her polite demeanor, I could see through the facade. She had this unsettling way of dominating every conversation, steering topics back to herself no matter what we were discussing. Even worse, she had perfected this technique of subtly putting others down while making it sound like she was giving them a compliment. I remember one particular instance when my mother served her famous lasagna, a recipe she'd been perfecting for decades. Cassandra took a bite, smiled sweetly, and commented on how brave it was that my mother still tried to cook traditional dishes at her age. Another time, she complimented my cousin's dress by saying how courageous it was for her to wear those particular colors with her skin tone. The words sounded like praise, but the underlying message was clear to anyone paying attention. While the rest of my family seemed to be falling for her act completely, I maintained a neutral stance. I didn't fake enthusiasm about having her around, and I certainly didn't pretend we were going to become instant family. I think that's exactly when I first appeared on her radar as a potential problem. It became increasingly clear that Cassandra always had some kind of angle she was working. Whenever people talked about their problems or challenges, she had this remarkable ability to somehow make the conversation about herself instead. Even with complete strangers, there was always this weird competitive edge to her interactions, as if she needed to establish dominance in every social situation. I'll never forget the time I witnessed her argue with a teenage cashier over a $3 coupon. What should have been a simple transaction turned into a 25-minute ordeal where she berated this poor kid, nitpicking every detail of the store's coupon policy until the teenager was practically in tears. It was completely disproportionate to the situation, but Cassandra seemed to derive some twisted satisfaction from wielding that kind of power over someone who couldn't fight back. A few months later, Vincent announced that he and Cassandra were engaged. I wasn't particularly surprised by the news, but I could tell that not everyone in the family was thrilled about it. After the announcement, my dad pulled me aside privately and shared his concerns. "That woman's going to be trouble for Vincent," he said quietly, looking around to make sure no one could overhear us. "Mark my words, she's not what she appears to be." It was reassuring to know that he saw through her act too. But as he pointed out, it wasn't our place to tell a grown man who he should or shouldn't marry. I didn't think much more about the situation until Vincent approached me with a request that would change everything. He asked if I could give Cassandra a part-time job at my garage while she was planning their wedding. According to him, she wanted to earn some extra money and stay busy during the engagement period, and he thought it would be a great way for me to help out a future family member. When I hesitated to give him an immediate answer, my mother got involved. She called me that same evening, insisting that family always helps family, and that it would only be a temporary arrangement. The pressure kept mounting from multiple directions, with Vincent becoming increasingly insistent about the whole thing. During one particularly irritating conversation, he even had the audacity to suggest that I owed him for referring some business my way the previous year. Eventually, I caved to the family pressure and agreed to hire Cassandra. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and I would pay dearly for that moment of weakness. From the very first day she started working at my garage, she was an absolute nightmare as an employee. She consistently showed up late, spoke to customers like they were idiots, and treated my other employees as if they were her personal servants. One of the most frustrating aspects of having her around was how she constantly interrupted Tyler, my lead mechanic, while he was trying to help customers. She would contradict his technical advice with completely incorrect information, creating confusion and undermining his expertise. It was embarrassing and unprofessional, but she seemed completely oblivious to the problems she was causing. The disasters kept piling up. She accidentally deleted an important customer database that we were supposed to back up, then had the nerve to blame it on what she called confusing procedures. To make matters worse, she started changing the work schedule without consulting me, giving herself all the easiest shifts while pushing the heavy lifting and difficult tasks onto my other employees. During her first week alone, she screwed up the parts inventory counts so badly that we ended up ordering double the brake pads we actually needed. When I brought this costly mistake to her attention, she just shrugged it off and said her business brain worked differently than my technical brain. She was constantly on her phone during work hours, always quickly putting it away whenever I walked by, as if I wouldn't notice what she was doing. The situation reached a new low when I caught her scrolling through Instagram during what should have been a serious customer consultation. The customer was an older gentleman who needed transmission work on his late wife's car, and he was explaining how emotionally important this vehicle was to him. While this man was pouring his heart out about preserving his deceased wife's memory, Cassandra was sitting there scrolling through vacation pictures, barely even pretending to listen. It was one of the most disrespectful things I'd ever witnessed in a professional setting. But the final straw came when I discovered her going through private conversations on a customer's phone that we hadn't wiped yet. When I confronted her about this massive breach of privacy, she didn't even have the decency to act embarrassed or apologetic. Instead, she just smiled at me and said it was part of her natural curiosity, as if violating someone's personal privacy was perfectly acceptable behavior. What made this incident particularly serious was that the customer happened to be a local lawyer. Those messages could have contained confidential client information, which would have made me legally liable for her actions. When I tried to explain the severity of what she had done, she rolled her eyes and dismissed my concerns. "Nobody's going to sue you," she said with an annoying smirk. "Don't be so uptight about everything." After enduring a full month of this incompetent and unprofessional behavior, I finally made the decision to fire her. I wasn't a jerk about it. I documented everything carefully and presented all the evidence to Vincent so he would understand why I had to let her go. Initially, he seemed to grasp the situation and appeared to accept my decision without too much argument. However, that night he called me back, and his entire tone had completely changed. It was obvious that he had discussed the situation with Cassandra in the meantime, and she had somehow managed to spin the story in her favor. "You just didn't give her a chance," he said, his voice filled with accusation. "She's really upset about how you treated her." I tried to explain that I had given her plenty of chances and that I had documented every single incident for good reason. "Yeah, sure," he spat back sarcastically. "You've always been like this, thinking you know everything and acting like you're too good to help out your own family. She's going to be my wife and you pull this shit on her. Screw you, man." That conversation marked the beginning of a much darker chapter in this whole ordeal. At family gatherings after that, Cassandra's behavior toward me became distinctly strange. Sometimes she would completely ignore me, treating me as if I didn't exist. Other times, she would make passive-aggressive comments that were just quiet enough that nobody else seemed to notice them, but loud enough for me to hear clearly. Then her behavior shifted in an even more disturbing direction. She started finding excuses to be alone with me, brushing past me in ways that seemed deliberately suggestive, and making comments that had clear sexual undertones. I did my best to keep my distance from her without being obviously disrespectful, but she seemed determined to create uncomfortable situations. The most blatant incident occurred during a 4th of July barbecue at my parents' house. While everyone else was outside enjoying the festivities, she cornered me in the kitchen. She stood uncomfortably close to me and asked if I was still angry with her about the job situation. Then she ran her hand down my arm in a way that was unmistakably inappropriate. I immediately stepped back and told her that we were good, but that I needed to go help my dad with the grill outside. I got out of that kitchen as quickly as possible, but I could feel her watching me for the rest of the day. She had this weird smirk on her face, like she was plotting something or had just won some kind of game I didn't even know we were playing. Things went to absolute hell after that incident. 2 months later, my garage door banged open during closing time, and Vincent stormed in with his face twisted in a rage I'd never seen before. "You're dead!" he shouted loud enough that Tyler, who was finishing up work in the back, came running out to see what was happening. "Cassandra's pregnant," Vincent announced, his voice shaking with fury. "She says you're the father. Care to explain that?" I literally couldn't speak for several seconds. The accusation was so absurd, so completely out of left field, that my brain couldn't process what I was hearing. When I finally found my voice, I told him he was completely out of his mind. I had never touched Cassandra inappropriately, never had any kind of romantic or sexual relationship with her, and certainly had never done anything that could result in a pregnancy. Vincent didn't believe a word I said. He lunged across the counter and grabbed my shirt, and Tyler had to physically pull him away from me. As Tyler was forcing him toward the door, Vincent snarled, "Cassandra gave me details and dates that matched up perfectly. I can't see her making something like this up." Within just a few days, my name was completely mud throughout the family and beyond. My mother was crying on the phone, devastated by what she believed was my betrayal of the family trust. My cousin Nicole sent me a 3-paragraph text message explaining how she had always known something was off about me, and how I was lucky that Cassandra wasn't pressing criminal charges for what I had supposedly done to her. My Uncle Dave called me directly, his voice cold and filled with disgust. "You're absolutely shameless," he said. "Taking advantage of your brother's fiancé like that. You disgust me." My aunt uninvited me from a family dinner that had been planned for weeks, and it became clear that everyone wanted to stay as far away as possible from the monster they now believed I had become. Throughout this nightmare, my dad was the only family member who called me from the very beginning to offer his support. "That woman's been looking for a way to cause trouble since day one," he told me during one of our conversations. "We're going to fight this thing and prove you're innocent." What hurt the most was that not a single other person bothered to ask for evidence or question Cassandra's story. No one demanded proof, no one asked for details that could be verified, and no one seemed to think it was strange that these allegations were coming from someone who had already shown herself to be manipulative and vindictive. They simply took her word as sacred truth, while she walked around with this smug, victorious smile, clearly enjoying the fact that she had me completely cornered. But that was just the beginning of this ordeal, because I wasn't about to lower my head and accept this injustice. If my brother and half my family wanted to throw me under the bus based on zero evidence, and the word of a woman they barely knew, they were about to learn exactly what happens when you back the wrong horse and bet against someone who's willing to fight for the truth. 3 weeks after Cassandra dropped her bombshell accusation, things got even worse instead of better. Rather than anyone coming to their senses and questioning her story, I found myself sinking deeper into a swamp of silence and suspicion that seemed to be spreading throughout my entire community. The accusation had spread far beyond just my family members. Neighbors, my mom's coworkers, people at the local gym in a town this size, word travels fast, and suddenly I was that guy. I had transformed from the quiet, normal auto mechanic who minded his own business into someone who had supposedly turned out to be a predator. I started noticing the changes in how people treated me almost immediately. The barista at my regular coffee shop, who used to chat with me about weekend plans and local events, now just silently handed over my order without making eye contact. The owner of the parts store next to my garage, someone I'd known and done business with for 8 years, suddenly found reasons to be in the back room whenever I came in to pick up supplies. My business took a direct and devastating hit. Within the same week, 4 of my regular clients called to cancel their service contracts. All of them gave vague excuses about budget cuts or deciding to go in a different direction with their automotive needs. Right. After years of satisfied service and positive relationships, they all coincidentally decided to cut costs during the exact same month that Cassandra's story hit the local rumor mill. It wasn't just my older, more conservative customers either. A local delivery company that had been sending me all their fleet repairs for the past 3 years suddenly went completely dark. The owner, someone I'd occasionally played pool with at the local bar, stopped returning my phone calls entirely. I later found out through mutual acquaintances that he'd switched to a shop that was 40 miles away, choosing to deal with the inconvenience and extra travel time rather than continue working with me. Vincent had completely cut me off from any form of communication. He wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't respond to text messages, and refused to even acknowledge my repeated demands for a DNA test that would prove my innocence once and for all. His silence wasn't just passive. It carried weight and served as a condemnation without requiring him to face a trial or present any actual evidence. The situation with my mother was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this entire ordeal. She had taken Vincent's side completely, and one night she called me with her voice shaking with emotion. She actually asked me if it was possible that I had done something inappropriate to Cassandra. That was the moment I truly realized how deep this poison had spread. Even my own mother, who had known me my entire life, had allowed doubt to creep into her mind about my character. "Possible?" I responded, my voice filled with disbelief. "Mom, I've never even been alone with her except at the garage with employees and customers around. You know me better than anyone. Do you honestly think I would do something like this?" The hesitation in her voice before she answered told me everything I needed to know. That pause, that moment of uncertainty from the woman who had raised me, said more than any words could have expressed. Fortunately, my dad remained my rock throughout this nightmare. "Your brother's been blind since the day he met her," he told me during one of our conversations. "And your mother has always sided with him in any conflict, no matter what the circumstances are. He helped me start documenting everything we could think of, building a case that we hoped would eventually clear my name." Meanwhile, Cassandra was playing her victim role with disturbing precision and skill. She kept adding new details to her story, elaborating on how I had supposedly been understanding and supportive while she was going through emotional confusion in her relationship. She claimed that I had manipulated her with sweet words and false promises, and that when she became pregnant, I had tried to pressure her into having an abortion. According to her latest version of events, when she refused to terminate the pregnancy, I had threatened to destroy her reputation socially if she told anyone the truth. She delivered these increasingly elaborate lies with tears in her eyes to Vincent, to my mother, and to my aunt, who called me specifically to tell me that she couldn't help but feel horrified by what she had heard. The performance was so convincing that even family members who had known me for decades were starting to question everything they thought they knew about my character. What made the situation even more infuriating was that there was still no actual medical evidence to support any of Cassandra's claims. She kept insisting that she was pregnant and that I was the father, but she hadn't shown any documentation to prove the pregnancy itself was real. Every time the subject of a DNA test came up, she refused to take one, claiming it would be too risky for the fetus and that she needed emotional stability rather than what she called a hostile environment. I started to wonder if this wasn't just a random attack on my character, but rather a calculated strategy designed to gain something else entirely. Maybe she was seeking attention, or trying to gain more control over Vincent, or looking for some kind of financial benefit. Or perhaps she was simply getting sadistic pleasure from systematically destroying another person's life and reputation. This wasn't just family drama or relationship conflict. This felt like premeditated destruction of everything I had worked to build. Tyler was the only employee who stuck around after the rumors started circulating and affecting my business. I saw exactly how she acted when she worked here, boss. He told me after a particularly slow day at the garage when we'd barely had any customers. She was always trying to get you alone, touching your arm, leaning in too close when she talked to you. I watched her do it multiple times when she thought nobody was looking. She's completely full of crap, and I'll tell anyone who asks about it. My dad suggested that I should try talking directly to Vincent one more time, hoping that maybe we could cut through the emotions and get to the truth. I agreed to meet him at a local diner, thinking that a public place might keep things civil. It turned out to be a big mistake. Vincent showed up already worked up, with bloodshot eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Just admit what you did," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "Just admit it, and we can figure out how to deal with this situation." I looked him straight in the eye and spoke as clearly as I could. "I didn't touch Cassandra, not ever. She's lying about everything, and you're too blind to see what she's really doing to our family." He stood up so fast that his chair fell backward, creating a loud crash that made other diners turn to stare at us. He leaned over the table, getting close to my face, and hissed, "You're dead to me." Then he stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting there alone while everyone watched. That night, I contacted a lawyer who specializes in defamation cases. After listening to my story for nearly an hour and reviewing the documentation I had compiled, he looked me directly in the eye and delivered some hard truth. "This situation isn't going to stop on its own," he said. "If you let her version of events prevail without fighting back legally, then no matter how innocent you actually are, everyone will remember what she said about you. They won't remember what you kept silent about." That advice hit me harder than anything else that had happened up to that point, because I realized he was absolutely right. What hurt the most wasn't just the lie itself, but the sense of complete abandonment I felt. The way Vincent and my mother had chosen the comfort of believing Cassandra's story over the discomfort of questioning it was devastating. They had decided it was easier to accept her version of events than to consider the possibility that they were wrong. But I want to make something absolutely clear. This game wasn't going to end the way Cassandra expected it to. I was prepared to force each and every one of them to look me in the eye when the truth finally came out. And when that moment arrived, I wasn't going to hesitate to collect on every single act of betrayal they had committed against me during this ordeal. A month into this absolute nightmare, the situation had gotten even more twisted and complex. Every morning I woke up feeling like I was on trial before some invisible court, one that didn't need evidence or proof, just rumors and accusations to render its judgment. Cassandra's story had become increasingly elaborate with each telling, and she seemed to be enjoying the creative process of building her fictional narrative. Now she was claiming that I used to visit the garage after hours specifically to spend time with her, and that we'd stay alone together until late in the evening. According to her latest version, I had taken her out to dinner multiple times as an excuse to get closer to her, and when she became pregnant, I had offered her money to keep quiet about our supposed relationship. She even claimed that I had forced her to delete threatening messages I had supposedly sent her. What was most disturbing about watching her tell these lies was the conviction with which she delivered them. She wasn't acting confused or hurt. She was a calculated performer who seemed to be genuinely enjoying her own dramatic production. She had clearly put thought and effort into crafting a believable story, and she told it with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She had also gotten remarkably specific with certain details, which made her lies sound more credible to people who weren't paying close attention. For example, she claimed that we had shared an intimate moment in the back storage room during my garage's New Year's party. The problem with that particular detail was that I had never thrown a New Year's party at my garage. We always just did gift cards for the employees and gave everyone an extra day off during the holidays. It was such an obvious fabrication, but Vincent was too emotionally invested in her story to notice these glaring inconsistencies. The effects on my daily life had become absolutely brutal. I had lost 4 major contracts with clients who suddenly preferred not to get involved in situations that could compromise the integrity of their company, as one of them put it. My reputation, which I had spent years building through honest work and reliable service, was now being treated like a liability that businesses wanted to avoid. My largest corporate client was a trucking company with 6 locations that had been giving me a $5,000 monthly service contract. The fleet manager, someone I had worked with closely for 4 years and considered a professional friend, pulled their entire contract overnight. When she delivered the news, she couldn't even look me in the eye. "It's not personal," she said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "It's just about optics and how things might look to our other clients." Optics, as if I was some kind of public relations problem, rather than a human being whose life was being systematically dismantled by lies and rumors. The casual way she dismissed years of professional relationship and quality service was almost as devastating as the financial loss itself. Even my most routine activities had become uncomfortable experiences. At the diner where I had eaten breakfast every Saturday morning for 6 years, the owner who I used to discuss sports and politics with regularly couldn't bring himself to maintain eye contact. He would just put down my coffee and disappear into the kitchen without saying a word, leaving me to eat in awkward silence. That's when the full weight of what was happening really hit me. This accusation had taken root in people's minds so deeply that evidence or proof didn't seem to matter anymore. I didn't need concrete confirmation to know that people believed the worst about me. I could see it clearly in the averted gazes, the suddenly closed doors, and the conversations that died abruptly whenever I entered a room. Meanwhile, Cassandra had started posting passive-aggressive content on social media that was clearly designed to generate sympathy and support for her supposed situation. She never mentioned me by name directly, but she would post phrases like, "When monsters have the face of an angel and justice comes in the form of a child." People who didn't know the full context would comment with supportive messages, not realizing they were participating in what amounted to a public lynching of my character and reputation. I had to start taking screenshots of everything she posted because my lawyer explained that we needed to document this pattern of defamation. He wanted to show how she was deliberately cultivating public sympathy while simultaneously working to destroy my reputation through social media manipulation. It was absolutely surreal to watch her weave this elaborate fantasy narrative while knowing the truth, but being completely powerless to make anyone believe my side of the story. The irony was that while I was fighting desperately just to clear my name and restore some semblance of normalcy to my life, she had created this heroic narrative where she wasn't just a victim, but practically a martyr standing up against injustice. What made the situation even more frustrating was that nobody, not one single person except my dad and Tyler, had demanded any kind of proof or evidence. The presumption of innocence that's supposed to be a fundamental principle in our society apparently didn't apply to me in this situation. Fortunately, my best friend Diego had remained solid throughout this entire mess. He had known me since high school and didn't buy Cassandra's story for even a second. "Remember Jenny Martinez from senior year?" He reminded me during one of our conversations over burgers at his place, which had become one of the only locations besides my apartment where I felt comfortable spending time. "She pulled the exact same kind of manipulative crap back then," Diego continued. "Different story, same basic playbook. Cassandra's going to slip up eventually, and when she does, we'll be ready to catch her in the lie." The only real progress in this nightmare had been through my lawyer's methodical approach to building a case. We had systematically documented every incident from the day Cassandra started working at my garage, creating a timeline that showed her pattern of inappropriate behavior. Tyler had provided a written statement detailing her unprofessional conduct and the inappropriate advances she had made toward me while she was employed there. We had also collected reports from other employees about her general incompetence and unprofessional attitude. My lawyer had even gone the extra mile to track down Cassandra's previous employers, and what he discovered was eye-opening. It turned out that this wasn't her first experience with workplace drama and false accusations. She had worked at a marketing firm in the next county over and had left under what were described as mysterious circumstances. When my lawyer got in touch with her former supervisor, the man initially refused to say anything specific about her employment there. However, after we explained the nature of our situation and the seriousness of the accusations being made, he reluctantly admitted that there had been ongoing concerns about her interactions with colleagues and questions about her professional conduct. While nothing had been specific enough to result in formal action, there had been enough issues to establish a clear pattern of problematic behavior in workplace settings. We had also started the complex legal process to require Cassandra to take a DNA test once the pregnancy had progressed far enough that testing would pose no risk to the fetus. It wasn't an easy process. There were protocols to follow, timelines to respect, and authorizations to obtain from various agencies that didn't seem to share my sense of urgency about resolving this situation. But it represented a clear path to the truth, and that possibility was what kept me going through the darkest moments of this ordeal. My dad and I had also started our own investigation, documenting everything we could think of and talking to people who knew Cassandra personally. We were looking for any inconsistencies in her story, or patterns of behavior, that might help expose the truth about what was really happening. Then the situation escalated from bad to significantly worse. I was closing up my garage late one evening when Vincent pulled into the parking lot. I could immediately tell that he had been drinking heavily. It was obvious from the way he moved, with that combination of aggression and unsteadiness that comes with too much alcohol. I decided to stay inside the garage and lock the door rather than confront him in his current state. Vincent started pounding on the glass with his fists, shouting, "Come out and face me, you piece of shit!" I was about to call the police when Vincent picked up a brick from the landscaping around the building and threw it directly through my front window. Glass shattered everywhere, creating a dangerous mess throughout the front area of my shop. Then Vincent actually climbed through the broken window, cutting himself in the process and leaving blood on the glass shards. Once he was inside, he charged directly at me with clear intent to cause serious harm. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I had no choice except to defend myself. I sidestepped his charge, and he crashed hard into one of my display cases. When he managed to get back up, I hit him once. A clean, straight punch to the jaw. He went down hard and stayed down. The neighbors must have heard the commotion and the sound of breaking glass, because the police showed up just 7 minutes later. They took detailed statements from both of us, photographed and documented all the damage to my property, and assessed Vincent's condition. Vincent was arrested for destruction of property and attempted assault, and this time I made the decision to press charges. I was completely done with letting him off the hook for his behavior. My mother called me that same night, sobbing uncontrollably into the phone. "How could you do this?" she kept repeating through her tears. "He's your brother, and you're actually sending him to jail over this?" When I tried to explain that he had attacked me on my own property and that I had only defended myself, she cut me off before I could finish. "I don't have a son who would do something like this," she said, and then hung up the phone. My dad arrived at the garage just as the police were putting Vincent in the squad car. "Are you okay?" he asked me, looking concerned about my physical and emotional state. I nodded that I was fine, and we both stood there in silence watching as they drove off with Vincent in the back seat. "You did the right thing by pressing charges," my dad said quietly. "He needs to face real consequences for his actions. But remember, despite everything that's happened, he's still your brother." "Doesn't feel like it anymore," I answered honestly. "This ends now," my dad said with determination in his voice. "Tomorrow we push harder for that DNA test, and we get to the bottom of this once and for all." I wasn't naive about the situation. I knew that even if a DNA test eventually proved that I wasn't the father of Cassandra's supposed child, some people would still believe that something inappropriate must have happened between us. The old saying about "where there's smoke, there's fire" would probably follow me for years, and I might never fully recover everything I had lost during this ordeal. But I was absolutely determined not to let Cassandra get away with what she had done to me and my family. She might have won the first round of this battle, but I had the patience, resources, and determination to confront her on her own turf and expose the truth. What she had done wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, destructive slander designed to ruin my life. And I was prepared to return every blow she had dealt me, except mine would be surgical, precise, legal, and definitive. 4 months into this ordeal, and my life had become an emotional wasteland where each day felt like a carbon copy of the nightmare that came before it. I was waking up each morning and going through the basic motions of living, but I was essentially existing under constant suspicion for something I had never done. My daily routines had become completely mechanical and empty. The isolation had carved out such a deep hole in my life that I sometimes wondered if I would ever be able to climb back out of it. My business was down almost 75% from where it had been before this nightmare started. Most days, I would sit alone in the garage while Tyler handled the few repair jobs that still came our way. The financial pressure was becoming increasingly severe. I had been forced to dip into my personal savings just to cover basic expenses like rent and utilities. This situation wasn't just attacking my reputation and relationships. It was systematically destroying my livelihood and threatening my ability to maintain the business I had worked years to build. I had started taking a completely different route to work each day, deliberately avoiding the main streets where I might run into people I knew from the community. It was simply exhausting to constantly see that flicker of judgment and suspicion in people's eyes whenever they recognized me. Yesterday, I overheard a customer whispering to Tyler, asking if that guy still actually owned the garage. Tyler, to his credit, defended me firmly and professionally, but the damage to my reputation was clearly visible. I ended up staying in the back room until the customer left because I couldn't handle another awkward confrontation. But today, something fundamental changed in this nightmare. The darkness that had been suffocating me for months finally started to recede. The truth, the actual, provable, undeniable truth, had finally broken through the wall of lies that Cassandra had constructed around me. After weeks of legal back and forth court filings and bureaucratic delays, we finally obtained what I had been demanding from day one: the DNA test. My lawyer had to push extremely hard with the judge, ultimately getting a court order for a prenatal paternity test that would pose no risk to the fetus. Cassandra's lawyer had tried everything possible to delay or prevent the test. They claimed that she was emotionally unstable, that the testing process would cause irreversible psychological consequences, and that they didn't want to expose their client to additional pressure during what they described as an already traumatic situation. However, after my dad strategically leaked details about the case to some of his reporter friends, and the story started gaining attention in local media, the judge finally agreed to order the test. The procedure was conducted at a private clinic under strict legal supervision to ensure that the results would be admissible in court. I'll never forget Cassandra's facial expression when she walked into the clinic that day. There was no fear, no shame, no nervousness about what the results might reveal. Instead, she just looked annoyed, as if this entire process was nothing more than a waste of her precious time. A minor speed bump that she had to deal with before returning to her performance. She walked right past me with her chin held high, acting like I was beneath her notice and not worth acknowledging. But I caught that one brief moment, that split second where her carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw genuine panic flash in her eyes. She already knew what the results were going to show. She had always known the mess that was waiting for her when the truth finally came out. The 3 weeks we spent waiting for the results were the longest of my entire life. I barely slept during that period, keeping my phone in my hand constantly, waiting for the call that would confirm what I had known all along. When the results finally arrived, I didn't have some dramatic emotional reaction. I just sat at my desk, staring at the paper in front of me, reading the words that would change everything. Probability of paternity, 0%. That 0 was my complete vindication, concrete, scientific proof that everything I had endured over the past 4 months was the direct result of a calculated lie told by someone who had severely underestimated how hard I was willing to fight back. My lawyer sent copies of the results to Vincent that same day, along with a formal letter demanding a retraction of all accusations. For 4 solid days, there was total radio silence from Vincent's side. It was as if everyone who had been so quick to condemn me and destroy my reputation now needed to hide from the uncomfortable reality of their mistake. Finally, on the 5th day, I received a text message from Vincent. It was brief and pathetic. "I need time. We'll talk to you later." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of his error, no expression of shame or regret. Just an empty, lukewarm, cowardly message that only strengthened my resolve to see this through to the end. Then the situation became even more interesting. My lawyer, who had been conducting a thorough investigation into the background of this case in preparation for a potential defamation lawsuit, discovered significant inconsistencies in the medical documents that Cassandra had presented as evidence of her pregnancy. There were altered dates, references to non-existent doctors, and document formats that didn't match the standards used by the clinic she claimed to have visited. When we cross-referenced this information with the clinic where the DNA test had been performed, we discovered that they had absolutely no previous record of Cassandra in their system. No appointments, no checkups, no prescriptions, no documentation of any kind, nothing. That's when my lawyer carefully suggested what I had already started to suspect based on all the evidence we had gathered. Cassandra had never actually been pregnant at all. She had fabricated the entire pregnancy from the very beginning. I almost couldn't believe it at first, not because I had any trust left in Cassandra's honesty. I already knew she was a complete fraud, but because it seemed almost inconceivable that someone would go to such extreme lengths just to destroy another person's life. The idea that she would fake an entire pregnancy, falsify medical documents, and maintain such an elaborate lie for months without ever breaking character seemed beyond what I thought any rational person would be capable of. But she had done all of this simply to get revenge on someone who had fired her from a part-time job and rejected her inappropriate advances. The level of vindictive spite required to orchestrate something like this was genuinely disturbing. However, the evidence was absolutely undeniable. Cassandra wasn't just a liar or someone who had made poor decisions. She was a pathological manipulator with a genuine talent for destruction and chaos. My lawyer decided to dig even deeper into her background, and what he found was a clear pattern of similar behavior throughout her past. She had pulled comparable stunts in 3 previous relationships, though never quite to this extreme level of deception. Ex-boyfriends who had somehow wronged her in her mind would suddenly find themselves facing accusations of stalking, harassment, or emotional abuse. One man had nearly lost his teaching job over false claims she had made to his school principal about inappropriate behavior. Fortunately for him, she had gotten sloppy with the details of her story. Security footage from the school proved conclusively that he had been nowhere near the location where she claimed the incident had occurred, and the timeline of her accusations didn't match the documented facts. We took all of this evidence to the judge: the DNA results, the irregular medical documents, the threatening social media messages, and testimonies from people who were finally starting to question Cassandra's version of events. Tyler testified under oath that he had witnessed Cassandra making inappropriate passes at me multiple times, and that she had become visibly angry when I didn't respond to her advances. Diego provided screenshots of contradictory social media posts she had made about her supposed pregnancy, showing inconsistencies in her story over time. Now the entire house of cards was finally crumbling, not with some dramatic explosion, but with the slow, inevitable creak of a lie that could no longer support its own weight under scrutiny. The next step in this process was the legal response that I had been working toward for months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could actually sleep through the night without feeling like there was a knife constantly pressed against my back. The truth had finally given me back my voice, my name, and my dignity. And now that I had those fundamental things restored to me, I was ready to move forward with what I had been patiently waiting for, making Cassandra pay real consequences for what she had done. Because if she thought this entire ordeal would simply end with a negative DNA test result and everyone would just move on with their lives, she was dead wrong about that assumption. This was just the beginning of her reckoning. 5 months had passed since Cassandra first told her lie, and the atmosphere surrounding this situation had completely shifted. We hadn't moved from chaos to calm. Instead, we had transformed from accusatory glances and veiled threats to a collective retreat by everyone who had participated in condemning me. But this wasn't a retreat designed to repair the damage they had caused. It was a cowardly attempt to hide from the shame of having participated in such a grotesque farce. The truth hadn't brought comfort or healing to anyone involved. Instead, it had exposed all the rotten, weak seams in our family fabric, revealing fragile loyalties and betrayals that had been disguised as neutrality or caution. Now that the DNA results were officially documented and the irregularities in Cassandra's medical documents had been exposed publicly, new rumors were starting to circulate among family members. Some were saying that maybe Cassandra had been confused about the situation, or that she might have been dealing with mental health issues that clouded her judgment. Others were suggesting that she simply wasn't right in the head, and that everything that had happened was the result of some kind of emotional crisis or breakdown. But not one person, not a single family member except my dad, Tyler, and Diego, had offered me a direct, personal apology for their role in this disaster. Their shame had turned them all into cowards, who found it easier to invent excuses and explanations than to admit they had condemned an innocent man they had known their entire lives. My aunt, the same woman who had uninvited me from the family dinner months earlier, had the absolute nerve to tell my dad that we all need to move past this as a family. She wanted to treat this situation like it had been some minor disagreement over Thanksgiving dinner politics rather than a systematic destruction of my reputation and livelihood. She couldn't even bring herself to say these things to my face. She had to go through my father like a coward. My cousin Nicole, who had sent me that 3-paragraph text message full of condemnation and accusations, was now acting like absolutely nothing had happened between us. She had the audacity to send me a casual invitation to her kid's birthday party last week, with no acknowledgement of how she had treated me during the worst period of my life. No apology, no explanation. Just this bizarre pretense that we were still on completely normal terms with each other. Vincent finally reappeared in my life, though not in the way I had expected. He showed up at my apartment one evening looking haggard and pale, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating properly for weeks. He couldn't meet my eyes as he told me that Cassandra had finally confessed to making the entire thing up from the beginning. According to Vincent, there had never been any pregnancy, no relationship between us, absolutely nothing. She had admitted to fabricating everything because she was furious that I had fired her from the garage job. In her mind, I had publicly humiliated her by letting her go, and she felt that I needed to be made to pay for that humiliation. Vincent spoke like a man who had been completely defeated by the revelation. But as I listened to him explain what Cassandra had told him, I felt absolutely no sympathy for his situation. Learning that a grown woman could maintain such an elaborate lie for months, fake an entire pregnancy, forge official documents, and nearly destroy a family out of nothing but vindictive spite had triggered a fury in me so cold and calculated that I couldn't even respond with traditional anger. I just stared at Vincent as he kept repeating that he didn't know what to say to me, and that he would understand if I never wanted to see him again. Everything in me wanted to remind him that he had tried to physically attack me in my own place of business. I wanted to point out that he had chosen to believe a woman he had known for 4 years over his brother of 29 years, without ever asking for proof or evidence. Instead of unleashing all the anger and resentment I had been carrying, all I said to Vincent was, "Get out." He tried to say something more, probably some additional attempt at an apology or explanation, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Get the fuck out of my apartment," I repeated. He left without saying another word. The very next day, I received a message from Cassandra herself, the first direct contact she had initiated with me since this entire nightmare began. I expected it to be some kind of apology or admission of guilt, but instead, what I got was even more infuriating than her original lies. Her message read, "I know everything got out of control, but I'm going through a hard time emotionally and didn't fully understand the consequences of my actions. Please withdraw the lawsuit. Do it for Vincent, if not for me." I had to read those words multiple times just to process the sheer audacity of what she was asking. This woman, who had spent months systematically defaming my character, who had encouraged and fueled lies about me on social media, who had nearly destroyed my business and torn apart my family, was now asking me for compassion and understanding. She was asking me not to pursue legal consequences for what she herself had deliberately destroyed. I didn't respond to her message at all. Instead, I immediately met with my lawyer and told him to proceed full steam ahead with the lawsuit for defamation, document forgery, and moral damages. We weren't backing down or showing any mercy at this point. We spent considerable time calculating the actual financial damage that her lies had caused. The lost contracts, the equipment I had been forced to sell to keep my business afloat during the worst months, the reputation damage that would take years to fully rebuild. It all added up to over $250,000 in direct measurable losses. And that didn't even account for the future business impact or the emotional damages I had suffered. This legal action wasn't about clearing my name anymore because that was already happening as the truth came out. This was about establishing a clear precedent and making sure that Cassandra and everyone who had participated in this lie understood that words have real consequences. Actions have weight and meaning, and no one has the right to systematically destroy another person's life out of anger, envy, or resentment. Some people might call my approach vindictive or excessive, but I called it justice. I didn't care if the legal process was slow or if the punishment wasn't as severe as I thought it should be. What I wanted was an official record, a legal document that would state in clear, unambiguous terms that I had been defamed, that lies had been told about me, and that I had been persecuted without any reasonable justification. I wanted Cassandra to face the stain of this legal judgment every time she applied for a job for the rest of her life. I wanted her to know that there was an official court ruling that contradicted her whispered version of events. I wanted Vincent to remember that his blind faith in a proven liar had turned his own brother into a social pariah. This wasn't impulsive revenge driven by emotion. This was meticulous, calculated justice, a systematic reparation process that didn't seek to shout or create drama, but simply to establish the facts in a legal forum. Everyone who had participated in this nightmare was going to face real consequences, and I was going to pursue those consequences with the same coldness and determination they had shown when they condemned me without evidence. 7 months had passed since Cassandra first launched her poison dart at my life. Today, looking back at the emotional storm, the financial losses, and the social isolation that had been caused by her carefully crafted lie, I can say that the truth has not only been legally recognized, but has produced genuine, tangible consequences for those responsible. Justice had finally spoken with the implacable weight of evidence, cross-examinations, forensic reports, and sworn testimonies that systematically dismantled Cassandra's elaborate artifice piece by piece. The final hearing was held last week, officially closing this chapter of the ordeal. But I want to be completely honest about something. Wounds from this kind of betrayal don't magically heal just because a court issues a ruling in your favor. They remain under your skin, only truly soothed when the person who caused the damage pays a real price for what they did. The final hearing was absolutely unforgettable, not as some dramatic climax to the story, but because for the first time in 7 months, I saw everyone involved in the situation, gathered together in one place, forced to confront the truth without excuses, evasions, or the ability to hide behind rumors and gossip. Cassandra arrived at the courthouse dressed with what appeared to be carefully studied sobriety, clearly trying to project an image of composure and dignity. However, that facade crumbled within minutes of my lawyer beginning to present our evidence against her. When he displayed the falsified documents she had submitted, ultrasounds that belonged to different patients, forged medical records, pregnancy certificates from clinics that didn't even exist, there was simply no defense possible for what she had done. The level of deception was so crude, so grotesque, and so obviously built on deliberate lies that even her own attorney seemed stunned. He simply nodded along as the evidence was presented and then asked the court for clemency, citing emotional distress and temporary mental instability as mitigating factors for his client's behavior. But then came the real turning point in the proceedings. When the prosecution presented the final pieces of evidence, clinic records that had been cross-referenced against Cassandra's submitted documents, timestamp inconsistencies, and metadata that had been extracted from the PDF files she had provided, her lawyer leaned over to consult with her and then went completely quiet. Cassandra didn't confess dramatically, she didn't break down crying, and she didn't make any emotional pleas for understanding. She just sat there blinking as the reality of her situation finally hit her. Her attorney requested a brief recess, came back into the courtroom, and quietly submitted a written statement acknowledging that the medical documents had been forged and that no pregnancy had ever actually existed. It wasn't a breakdown or an emotional collapse. It was simply defeat without any fight left in her. Vincent sat through the entire confession and presentation of evidence with his face getting progressively paler by the minute. Not once during the entire proceeding did he look in my direction or make any attempt at eye contact. My mother wasn't present at the hearing. She had claimed illness, though my dad later told me it was really just shame that she couldn't bring herself to face in a public courtroom. My dad sat directly behind me throughout the entire hearing, providing a solid, reassuring presence at my back during one of the most important moments of this whole ordeal. Tyler and Diego flanked me on either side, the only people besides my father who had believed in my innocence from the very beginning and had stood by me when it would have been easier to distance themselves from the controversy. When the judge finally announced the ruling, my dad put his hand on my shoulder in a simple gesture that meant more to me than 1,000 words could have expressed. It was a moment of validation and support that I had been waiting for throughout months of isolation and betrayal. The judge's ruling was crystal clear and comprehensive. Cassandra was found guilty of aggravated defamation, document forgery, and causing moral damages through her deliberate lies. She was ordered to pay a significant financial penalty in installments spread over several years. Plus, she was issued a restraining order that prevented her from approaching or attempting to communicate with me for at least 4 years. The court didn't sentence her to prison time, but that wasn't what I had been seeking anyway. What I had wanted was a precedent, an official legal document that validated everything I had said from day one, something that would restore at least partially the dignity that had been taken from me by a woman who had played the victim without caring about who she destroyed in the process. The judge also ordered her to post a public retraction on the same social media platforms where she had spread her lies about me. Within 24 hours of the ruling, she was required to explicitly state that she had falsely accused me, that there had never been any romantic or sexual relationship between us, and that she had fabricated the entire pregnancy from beginning to end. Since the court ruling was finalized, I've been receiving messages from various relatives who had previously turned their backs on me during the darkest period of this ordeal. Some of them are offering vague excuses about not knowing what to think at the time, or claiming they had wanted to stay out of the situation out of what they call prudence. Others have opted for total silence, apparently hoping that enough time will pass to erase their complicity in what happened to me. Vincent has tried calling me multiple times since the hearing concluded. I've blocked his number on my phone because whatever he might have to say at this point, I'm simply not interested in hearing it. The brother I thought I knew would never have believed such obvious lies about me in the first place. He would never have tried to physically harm me over accusations that had no evidence supporting them. Most importantly, he would never have abandoned me when I needed family support the most. My mother has sent me several tearful voicemails, begging me to talk to her and trying to explain her behavior during this nightmare. I haven't returned any of her calls because some betrayals run too deep to be fixed with tears and apologies after the fact. When your own mother questions whether you're capable of the things you've been accused of, that leaves a mark that doesn't fade quickly. 1 full year has passed since this ordeal began, and I'm happy to report that my business has not only recovered from the damage it sustained, but has actually expanded beyond where it was before Cassandra's lies nearly destroyed everything I had worked to build. The recovery wasn't immediate or easy. For months after the truth came out, I was still working with a severely reduced schedule, scraping by with part-time repair jobs and the loyalty of just one client who didn't care about the rumors that had been circulating. I knew that simply staying silent and waiting wouldn't be enough to clear my name completely, so I did what I do best. I fixed the problem myself. I posted the complete court verdict and my full side of the story on my business website, making sure that anyone who searched for information about me or my garage would find the truth. I pinned this information to our Google reviews and let the official receipts speak for themselves. One of the larger clients who had dropped me during the worst period of the scandal eventually came back after their legal team reviewed the court ruling and realized they had made a mistake. That single contract alone covered 3 months of operating costs and helped stabilize my finances during the recovery period. I didn't beg for their trust or try to convince them to give me another chance. I simply rebuilt my reputation piece by piece through consistent, quality work. Eventually, I was able to hire 3 new part-time employees and move my operation to a larger, better-equipped location across town. The court ruling had become part of the public record, and slowly but surely, the real story began to replace the lies that had circulated throughout the community for so many months. I heard through my dad that Vincent and Cassandra's relationship didn't survive the aftermath of the trial. Apparently, the public humiliation and exposure of her lies was too much for their relationship to bear. Vincent has since moved to another state, ostensibly for work, but probably more to escape the memories and embarrassment of what had happened here. He tried reaching out to me again last month through a handwritten letter, saying that he wanted to make amends for what had occurred. In the letter, he claimed that he had been blinded by love and manipulated by what he now recognized was a professional liar. He said that he missed having his brother in his life and wanted to try to rebuild our relationship from scratch. I burned that letter without finishing it. Some bridges, once they've been completely burned down, should stay that way. The damage to our relationship wasn't just about being temporarily misled. It was about the fundamental choice he made to believe a stranger's lies over his own brother's word when it mattered most. My mother and I have managed to establish what I would call an uneasy truce. We see each other at family holidays and exchange basic pleasantries, but the warmth and closeness that used to characterize our relationship is completely gone. She made her choice about which side to support when it mattered most, and that's not something I can simply forget, even if I've technically forgiven her for it. My relationship with my dad has become closer and stronger than it ever was before this ordeal began. He stood by me when it truly counted, never doubting my innocence for even a second, even when it would have been easier for him to stay neutral or avoid taking sides. We've established a new tradition of having dinner together every Sunday, a routine that was born from the ashes of our old family dynamics and represents something more meaningful than our previous casual interactions. Tyler received a well-deserved promotion to garage manager, a position he earned through his unwavering loyalty during the darkest period of this nightmare. When it would have been much easier for him to distance himself from the controversy and find work elsewhere, he chose to stay and defend my reputation. That kind of loyalty deserves to be rewarded with real opportunities for advancement. Diego and I still meet for drinks every week, and our friendship has been strengthened by weathering this storm together. He never wavered in his support, never questioned my version of events, and was always there when I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't going crazy or imagining the injustice of what was happening to me. As for Cassandra herself, she moved across the country shortly after the trial concluded, apparently hoping to escape the consequences of her actions and start fresh somewhere else. After failing to make the first 4 payments on the fine that the court had ordered her to pay, she seemed to think that relocating would somehow make her legal obligations disappear. My lawyer informed me that this kind of behavior is actually quite common. People assume they can outrun court judgments by moving to a different state, but what Cassandra didn't realize was that we had been prepared for exactly this possibility. We filed the proper paperwork to enforce the judgment in her new state, ensuring that her attempt to flee wouldn't absolve her of the financial consequences she owed me. Interestingly, a few anonymous negative reviews appeared on my business profile not long after she relocated. They had the same distinctive writing style and weird punctuation patterns that I remembered from her social media posts during the height of this controversy. We flagged these reviews and built a comprehensive digital paper trail documenting the harassment. If she continues trying to play these kinds of games with my reputation, we'll be ready to nail her for ongoing harassment in addition to everything else. The truth may have ultimately set me free from the immediate nightmare she created, but it didn't restore everything I lost during those dark months. Some friendships never recovered, some family relationships remain permanently strained or completely broken, and some potential clients still hear whispers from people who remember the accusations without bothering to learn about the resolution. But from the rubble of what she tried to destroy, I've managed to rebuild something that's actually stronger and more authentic than what I had before. I now have a business that doesn't depend on family connections for its success, friendships that are based on loyalty that's been tested by fire, and a much clearer understanding of who I can really count on when times get tough. There's an old saying that revenge is a dish best served cold, but I have to disagree with that sentiment. Justice, real, meaningful justice, isn't revenge at all, it's restoration, and that's exactly what I achieved through this process. It wasn't perfect justice, and it wasn't complete restoration of everything I lost. But it was enough to allow me to look at myself in the mirror each morning and know that when they tried to bury me with lies and false accusations, I refused to become a grave for their deception. Instead, I became exactly what they feared most. Someone who wouldn't keep his mouth shut when the truth needed to be told. Someone who was willing to fight as long and as hard as necessary to expose the lies and hold the liars accountable for their actions. So here's my question for anyone who's read this far. Do you think Vincent deserves a second chance at rebuilding our relationship? Was cutting him off completely the right call, or should I consider giving him an opportunity to make amends? I've tried putting myself in his shoes and imagining how I might have reacted if someone I loved and trusted had told me similar lies about a family member. But damn it, the fact remains that he chose to believe a stranger over his own brother. That's not the kind of betrayal you just bounce back from like nothing happened. Anyway, I really appreciate anyone who took the time to read through this entire story. It's been therapeutic to get it all down in writing and share it with people who might understand the situation. How would you handle it if you found yourself in my position?